I'd like to call the Legislation Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Rhodey. Alderman Boyd. Alderman Vaccaro.
Present.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderman Narayan.
Here.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Here.
Chairwoman Negracia.
Present.
President Reed.
Here.
5 present, you have quorum.
Thank you. We're going to move the excused alderman to the end of the meeting. And if you have a moment to look at the minutes from our November 4th meeting, I would entertain a motion to pass those.
So I'll make a motion that we pass the minutes from the November 4th meeting.
I'll second that.
Please call the roll.
Alderman Rhodey. Alderman Boyd. Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Muhammad. Alderman Narayan.
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Negracia.
Aye.
President Reed. 5 aye votes.
Thank you. So the order of business we have this evening is an update on the development and usage of clean energy in the city's clean energy plan by President Reed. Thanks for being here this evening, and thanks to the members of the public who are here as well.
Good evening. I think I could say good evening, right?
Good evening.
Hey, I just want to first thank each and every member of the committee for coming tonight to hear from all of the volunteers that worked to put this great plan together for the city of St. Louis. You know, it was a little over a year, actually about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago now, that we passed Resolution 124, which began the process of setting St. Louis on the course to 100% clean energy. We were able to assemble a commission to begin looking at that, and you're going to hear from them tonight. I'm going to have Mary Reese from our office come up to begin the process, if you would, if that's okay, and to introduce the various different members, and then I'll talk after the presentation. That way we have plenty of time for them to give their presentation. But before we begin, can you all just join me in a round of applause for them, because they put in so many hours and time. And this Pathways book will allow St. Louis to get on the path of 100% clean energy and be a leader in the Midwest.
Thank you, members of the committee, for being here this evening. My name is Mary Reese. I'm Legislative Director to Board of Aldermen President Louis Reed, and I've also had the privilege of co-chairing this committee for the past 18 months. And I have to echo what President Reed just said. These volunteers behind us have literally spent hundreds of hours of their free time, their weekends, their nights, their evenings dedicated to making St. Louis a better city, more environmentally friendly, sustainable, and it's been a pleasure to work with them. So this is kind of like our baby, and we're so excited to be here today to go through it with you guys. I wanted to introduce them and some of them are here, so the guys who are here, if you guys could stand up. Emily Andrews was our advisory board member. Reverend Roderick Burton, Jen DeRose, Andy Knott with the Sierra Club, Bruce Morrison, Reagan Nelson, Rajiv Ravalupati, Ann Siegel, and Phil Valco. And then we also had 2 subcommittees. So we had a technical committee, and then we had a community engagement group. Some of these folks are also on the technical advisory group. Emily Andrews, Andy Knott, Andrew Linares, Rajiv Ravalupati, Henry Robertson, Ann Siegel, Phil Valco, and Aaron Young. And then on our community engagement subgroup, we had Reverend Burton, Leah Clyburn, Jen DeRose, Sarah Edgar, and Reagan Nelson. So for the past 18 months, we've been working together to develop this plan. It was not just done in a vacuum. We've spent time out in the community. We've talked with various corporations. We've talked with various stakeholders. We've talked with city departments. We have done a lot of research and work on this. We've also worked with other cities and how they develop their plans. Atlanta was one that we really looked to a lot. So we spoke with them and we kind of modeled ours off of that. We also did a community survey, which was distributed online. We also had it out at a few community events, including Earth Day. We had it down in the Rotunda a few days. Ameren donated LED light bulbs, so it was kind of an incentive to fill it out, and you got your LED light bulbs. We collected about 1,000 responses from residents and taxpayers in the city of St. Louis, which helped guide the priorities of the recommendations that you see in front of you. I think next is our goal. As a part of Resolution 124 and in addition to the advisory board, we decided to create goals to help guide this process. So our 5 goals was cost effectiveness, to meet the electricity needs of consumers in the most cost-effective manner possible, health, to improve local health outcomes, equity, to ensure equitable access for low-income communities, communities of colors, and other marginalized groups, jobs, to create more jobs for our residents, and then obviously reduce emissions. So we took those 5 goals, we took what our residents said and all the information we heard from all the community meetings we had, the survey results, and then that is how we created the Pathways report that is in front of you. So I'm going to turn it over to the experts, what I call volunteer consultants, because they're not just volunteers, these are industry experts. The other thing we really tried to do was make sure we had people from all different sectors in this process, not just environmental folks. We have various members of clergy and all different groups. So it's a great group, and I'm really proud to work with them. So I'm going to turn this over to Rajiv.
Thank you guys for taking the time to listen to us. Just to echo some of the things that Mary said about these broad goals of Resolution 124, so the Pathways report that you all have in front of you, one thing I wanted to be clear is pointing out that third bullet you see on the slide up ahead, is that the purpose of the Pathways report, which was developed by the Technical Advisory Group, or Technical Subcommittee rather, it's not intended to be a comprehensive discussion of all the energy decisions available for St. Louis. The way we've described it as a menu of options of policy recommendations that we split up into 2 categories, one specifically for citywide operations and one for community-wide solutions. So it's to outline the key considerations and the trade-offs between all the policy recommendations within those 2 buckets for city operations and for community. I'm sorry? Will you explain the 2 different documents? Sure. So the 2 documents that all the members have in front, there is the actual Pathways report. It is the all white and black and white document with the plastic binding. That is the actual technical report. The way we've labeled it, that is the Pathways report. That is the report that the technical subcommittee developed over the past 18 months. That is the real meat of what we're calling the transition to 100% clean energy by 2035. All of our policy recommendations for citywide operations and for the community-wide are listed in there. It's very detailed, it's very technical, it's very granular, and we're here to answer the questions that you may have. Of course, this is going to be an ongoing process, but there are a lot of policy recommendations that are currently being undertaken right now, and then there are a lot that will need the support of the Board of Aldermen and various stakeholders. And the other version, the colored version, nicely summarizes everything that is in that technical report and just boils it down to the very high level 30,000-foot overview. Yeah, I think this is my last slide. You can go to the next one, Mayor. And this is just reiterating the pathways to our goals. So we established those 5 overarching goals that Mary outlined: cost effectiveness, health, equity, jobs, reducing emissions. And Renew Missouri, who will be talking later by Andrew Linares, set up a community-wide survey to collect feedback from the community. And I know that's hard to read, but that slide right there, or that graph, is listed within the the pathways report, as well as the 15-page version. And what we found from over our 1,000 respondents is that there's a clear preference for health, jobs, and equity. There's different percentages that rank in there, but I think the most powerful statistic to tell you is that 90% of our respondents support a clean energy future and transition for the city of St. Louis. And I'll turn it over now to Henry Robertson. I believe he's next.
Yeah.
These are the two pathways we've identified to get city operations to 100%.
I'm sorry, just really quickly, can you identify yourself in the microphone for the record? Thanks.
My name is Henry Robertson. I'm with Great Rivers Environmental Law Center and part of the technical committee here. Okay, we have two pathways to get city operations to 100% clean energy. And the efficiency and solar components are identical in each one, but there's a choice to be made by the city on wind. First, the city can meet 10% of its clean energy goal through energy efficiency, pursuing all clean, cost-effective energy efficiency in city buildings. And this really just builds on what the city's already been doing for some years now. Efficiency saves energy and money, and there are ways to finance it that can reduce or even eliminate the upfront costs. Second, the city can meet 10% of its goal with rooftop solar on city-owned buildings. And we recommend that the city pursue a leasing option, which means you get a solar company to install panels on the city roofs and then lease them to the city. That eliminates the upfront cost. You pay off the lease while at the same time you're not paying for that electricity to generate the solar panels. And when the lease is up, the city owns the panels. That leaves 80% of the goal to be met with wind. Wind does the heavy lifting. And here we identified what we call regional and remote options. Pathway 1 is the regional. That means we would get the wind through Ameren, Missouri's Renewable Choice Green Tariff Program. Now, Green Tariff is something that's devised for corporations and municipalities that have clean energy goals to subscribe to wind that Ameren will provide. Pathway 2, this is the regional, and this refers to the fact that it's possible to buy rights to renewable energy anywhere in the country through something called a virtual power purchase agreement. And the cheapest of these that we could find were in Texas, which has more wind power than any other state. Backing up to Pathway 1, you can see here we put a price on it, $3 million a year. The fact we really don't have any idea what the price will be for two reasons. One, Ameren has not yet identified where the wind farms will be located or what their price will be. And second, the contract price will be adjusted every month according to market prices. And depending on what market prices do, the city could get a credit on its bill, or it could end up paying the difference if the price goes down. And the virtual power purchase agreement works much the same. So on option 2, considering this, we put a zero cost on that. It's possible that we could, zero out. We could conceivably, you could even make money on a deal like that. The Ameren green tariff, based on the power prices projected for the wholesale market that Ameren's in, we don't think that it will be a moneymaker for the city. However, the Ameren green tariff has a much better local benefits in terms of public health costs reduced by cleaner air, emissions reductions, and jobs creation. For Pathway 2, If we buy from Texas or someplace like that, it won't have any direct impact on us in those departments, and so the local benefits will not be as great. Thank you.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, because unfortunately I'm going to have to excuse myself shortly. Can I ask a question? Because it sounds like what you're talking about has to do with deregulation. If we bought energy from Texas or from another state at a lower cost and all those type of benefits. And it's real technical what you're saying. So can you say what you just said in layman's terms where most people who are ignorant to tariffs and all that kind of stuff can kind of really understand?
Well, yeah,
And especially as it relates to Ameren and how it's a benefit to Ameren and how it's a benefit to the city of St. Louis.
okay. Well, we are a regulated state. I mean, I think the whole virtual power purchase idea arose in deregulated states like Illinois.
Right.
How it works really is under a power purchase agreement, a virtual agreement, there's a corporation usually. It's buying power from a provider, say a merchant power across the river. It's not buying from a regulated utility like Ameren. And they're afraid of price increase. So they take out this power purchase agreement that'll pay them back if the price of power goes up. So if the price they're paying to their supplier goes up, they can claw some of that back through this virtual power purchase agreement.
So has the state of Missouri allowed us to be able to do this price purchase agreement that sounds like, so is it virtual deregulation or, because
No,
this
it's
is
not-
something that I
It's
I
not
was
virtual
exposed to 20 years
deregulation.
ago.
Yeah, it's virtual signifies that we're not actually getting that wind energy.
Okay.
Okay. And the Ameren thing is structured very differently. It was approved by it's a unique beast in Missouri regulation so far, but it's approved by the Public Service Commission. It operates much the same way. So the city would have to pay its usual rate for the usual mix of coal and nuclear and renewable that everybody else gets. And then this renewable choice agreement is on top of that, which is why it costs more. They haven't just made it say, so you can substitute wind for the usual mix. That's just the way they did it.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll save questions till the end so you
Okay.
can wrap up the presentation. Thanks for your time.
And then next, we have Andrew Linares.
Hi, good evening. My name is Andrew Linares. I'm with Renew Missouri. So I want to talk to you, if you can see here, I want to talk to you about some of the effort we went to score the strategies or the recommendations in this report relative to one another. So as you saw at the beginning, we have two different categories of recommendations. First, we wanted to address the city's operations, which in the scheme of things is much smaller than the whole citywide operations, all the private sector included. So in both of those, we wanted to assign relative scores to based on the metrics or the goals that we had established. And those goals, again, are the cost effectiveness of the strategy, the potential for job creation, the impacts on public health, concerns about equity and fairness among all the city's people, and then how much emissions we're actually avoiding by each strategy. Okay, so this is a table that shows you what the policy scores mean. We decided to assign a score of 0 through 4, so 5 different levels. And depending on which metric, it means something else. So usually 0 meant that that particular strategy has no effect. There's no impact on that metric. 1 would be slight, and then 4 would be, this is, that represents the biggest leap forward in that particular metric. It's important to note, and if you have your report on page 21, that's where we start to score the actual metrics, and these are the energy efficiency recommendations for city operations. We think energy efficiency for the city is a win-win-win scenario. It saves money. It makes the buildings appreciate in value and last longer, and it's going to be saving energy. So you can see that for city operations goals, we haven't assigned a value for equity, and that's because this doesn't have to do with any customers or any of the city's population. This is purely a matter of city buildings. So in the case of city operations, equity wasn't taken into account. We simply skipped over that. Later in the report, let's see, as you get to, for example, in the 50s, you'll see those are the private sector recommendations, and those do have relative scores for equity. So just as an example, energy efficiency, page 21, pursue all cost-effective energy efficiency in city-owned buildings. That's our #1 recommendation for energy efficiency for city operations. We feel that that has a very high score for cost effectiveness and jobs. In addition, we're improving some public health by reducing emissions and cleaning up city buildings for city employees. And energy efficiency is also not only is it the most cost effective, but it's the best way to reduce emissions. So that's just an example, and I think you can go on there. So here's our list of city operations policy recommendations. I already mentioned all cost of energy efficiency in city-owned buildings. We've also made recommendations like seeking an Energy Star certification for all city buildings by 2030. Another recommendation we've made, and we're working on looking at various job descriptions for this, is hiring an energy manager, perhaps to be housed in the facilities division for the city. This would be to support projects on city buildings, whether it be renewable energy or energy efficiency or others. And a few others, rooftop solar project across the city's portfolio. Henry mentioned the 2 different options for what's going to be the bulk of our city operations clean energy, which is through wind. And that's because wind is currently the cheapest resource on the market. And we feel that, and it's also in being purchased in great quantities, right? Unlike some other things like rooftop solar would be great visibly and would reduce the demand of individual buildings, but to really get a lot of it in one go, you're going to have to go with wind. So there's 2 options there for wind. You all should be familiar with the benchmarking effort that's going on right now. Rajiv and Emily both have worked on that for the past few years, and we think that can be expanded and improved upon. So Mary, I'm not sure who's next, but thank you for your time.
Next, we have Emily Andrews.
Good evening. Thanks for being here tonight, listening to us. My name is Emily Andrews. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Green Building Council, Missouri Gateway Chapter. Pleased to have served on this committee. I also, as Andrew mentioned, have been working with the Building Division on the energy benchmarking legislation, both the passage and implementation of that. And I also serve on 2 other city boards, the Clean Energy Development Board, which oversees the PACE program, and the Forest Park Advisory Board. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the community strategies that we have outlined in this plan. So while the city has the most control over its own operations, obviously, in order to really address the community's full carbon footprint, we have to encourage and sometimes even require action at the private sector. So the benchmarking legislation that passed in 2017 is a good example of this, something that the city's already done, requiring our largest buildings to track and report their energy usage annually and send that information to Rajiv in the Building Division. But you can look at page, I think, 11 of the executive summary for these details if that's too far away for you to read, because it is for me. Some are already in progress. The Solar Ready legislation has been drafted and introduced to the board, sponsored by Alderwoman Navarro and has many co-sponsors. So we look forward to seeing that move forward. It requires that new construction, both residential and commercial, be solar ready, which means they'll be wired for solar panels, oriented in the proper direction when possible, and have the ability to support the load of those panels on the roof. Basically, that's kind of like the overarching. We are also working with the building division on a building energy performance standard that's in the current phase of development that would kind of build upon the benchmarking work and require, it'll set energy performance targets for some of our largest buildings. Again, these are the buildings that are using the most energy, so the most opportunity to save energy. Another opportunity that we think that would both help commercial and residential occupants is an energy disclosure requirement at the point of sale or lease or rental, so that future owners and renters of buildings understand the energy use of the space that they'll be moving into and the bills. I think this could especially be helpful in the affordable housing space, where renters may have less money to waste on inefficient dwellings. So these are just a few of examples of really specific things that we came up with. There's a lot of opportunity there. I feel like this isn't as I mean, there's probably a lot more out there, right, that we could have put on a list, but we went through a pretty deliberative process of trying to get as focused as possible on what we thought would have the most bang for the buck, and also that aligned with work that was already happening in the city and that was already being supported by programs that the city was participating in, like the City Energy Project and the American Cities Climate Challenge. So that's kind of how some of these ideas came forward. So if you want to move to the next slide. Andrew actually covered this. This is just a couple really specific examples of how these strategies got scored. So this is pursuing all cost-effective energy efficiency in our city buildings. You can see that pretty much scored high across the board, which is how it rises to like the #1 recommendation for city operations. And then the next one is related to workforce development for city residents, just encouraging the city to do whatever we can to push equity and inclusion forward while addressing environmental issues in the workplace. So this one also, you can see, scored pretty well among the different goals that we set out. So that's pretty much what I have. Thanks.
So this was our biggest step in the process, so thank you for taking the time to listen with us. We have a multitude of experts here, so if you have questions, we're happy to answer them.
Alderman Vaccaro?
I really don't. I mean, they're much, I'm sorry, I don't. You're much smarter than me. I'm going to go with the flow. I think you guys are doing a great job, and as the legislation comes forward, I'm sure I'll take all the education I can get on it, but I appreciate your efforts, and it looks like, you know, a lot of times these things are formed and 20 years go by and we say, whatever happened to that group, you know. But no, I'm glad to see you here. I appreciate the committee chairman bringing it forward and giving me the opportunity, and I'm along for the ride. I think it's a good idea, and as these board bills come up, I'm sure I'm going to support them, so I have no questions, at least until something's in front of us we're voting on.
Alderwoman Hubbard?
I don't have any questions either, but thank you for your work. I'm reading up now, and I'll be looking forward to reading this stuff this evening. I remember when you came in my ward and presented, and I can appreciate that. So I will definitely be supporting this work. Just, it's not really a question. It might not be a question for them, but what are the next steps that, like, I can support on, or what, Louis?
There are a couple next steps, and I'm going to actually ask any of the members if they have anything that they want to add to this. One of, you know, having dealt with these types of issues for years, it's really important that we find a way to codify it, right? That it's not just enough to have the pathways plan in front of us and, you know, to assure that it goes somewhere. One of the major next steps that the board will take, and my office is going to be working on it, is how do we formalize this, right, into the records of the city of St. Louis, something beyond just a resolution. So that's some of the next steps that we're looking at in my office, and we'll be willing to work with any members of the committee who want to be involved in that process, because I think it truly has to be a collaborative process. But it's clear to me also that the city of St. Louis, we have a major opportunity not just to lead in something, but to transform our city, right? And transform our city for the better. You know, we know that the federal government isn't going to do it for us. And so even if Donald Trump is somehow loses, right, and I think that's going to be tough, but I think that he can be defeated. But even if he is defeated, what it has done is woken up cities all across this nation to the fact that we cannot rely on the federal government, and then in this case also the state, to do the work for us. We're going to have to do it ourselves. So that's why I think it's just so important that we formalize this. We're also going to be working with members of the committee to take a look at various different pieces of legislation that we should be looking at that would move us into this also, right? You heard from, I think it was Emily, a little bit earlier about some of the, about the piece of legislation that Heather Navarro is putting forth. So it'll be things like that that we do. But it has to be the core, it has to be the thing that drives our decisions. So when we're looking at the city's budget, it has to drive our decisions. When we're looking at other pieces of legislation and say, okay, how are we going to create jobs, it has to drive our decision. When we're looking at revisions to our building code, it has to drive all of those decisions. It literally touches every single sector of everything we do. Public safety and all of it, right? So that's why I think it's just so critical that we formalize this, pathways report in some way.
Alderman Ryan?
I don't have anything.
Okay.
I wasn't, I want to say one more thing.
Okay.
I just want to, okay, so I get that part, so thank you, and just know that I want to support you all on formalizing it, and I also think that the narrative and the way we take it to the community when we get on the ground with it is going to be important, especially with the equitable piece, so I want to be able to help with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hold you to that. We'll give you some homework.
I have a few questions, but also wanted to echo my colleagues' gratitude. We literally could not do our jobs without relying on stakeholders like you, and it takes a lot to commit the amount of time and effort outside of your regular days to do this, so thank you very much. On the scoring, when Andrew was up here.
Who can talk to the score?
Yeah, so, you know, if you add, you pointed us to page 21, so when you're adding the scores, I would assume if the recommendations, I don't know if they are in order of like their value.
Yeah, I think that's the case.
Okay.
Let me just find that.
Yeah, I
for
mean,
you.
it's not on here. I mean, they're all over the place. The first one has a score of 15, then 9, 12, 6, and 9. So I'm just curious if we're looking, how best to look at the scoring system.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily even look at the like cumulative score
Okay.
across the metrics. I would just say, you know, based on what decision makers think is most valuable, you know, you can look and see
Okay.
what
I just
is
wanted to make sure
relatively
I
valuable to you.
was gonna understand the information correctly.
The other piece that we ended up leaving out, but we'd be happy to continue working with, you know, the Board of Aldermen on is, or the committee, is like the relative ease of each strategy to accomplish. Some of these are going to be really easy, like updating a building code. Others are going to be fairly complicated, like, you know, retrofitting all or some city buildings, right? That's like a long process and requires capital and financing and an RFP and all this stuff. So Some of them do have differences in terms of how difficult they are to implement. Some of them, the city's making progress on already, right? So we'd be happy to continue to work with President Reed's office in identifying the low-hanging fruit and identifying the really important ones to target.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful for us. The more of a roadmap we have, just because we don't have staff or anybody to
Yeah.
help support our work on what you just mentioned, and I think also, as President Reed mentioned, on the policy and legislative pieces, it's really nice to have that a blueprint for that, so that even if the people who are sitting at this table today aren't here, the people who come in after us will be able to undertake that same work.
Yeah, understood. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess for President Reed, I have a question. I appreciate that you said that we have to, codify a lot of this and make sure it goes somewhere. And I think a number of my colleagues and I mean, one of the things that I always ask developers about if they're asking for a tax incentive in the city, I've got 3 questions: your minority women-owned business participation, your green and sustainable construction and build-out, and then prevailing wage union jobs. And so how can we make sure that we have so many amazing plans in the city? I mean, how are we going to make sure SLDC understands that this is something that's important to us and that we're not going to say yes to developments that aren't going to undertake some or all of these
I think,
recommendations?
well, you and I both know it starts with that one person just drawing a line in the sand like you, right? By asking those 3 questions to every single development that comes your way, right? You're going to influence that developer, and you're also going to influence the colleagues around you by doing it, right? So, once we do go through the process and codify this, we know that when we put ordinances in place, we're going to have to hold the development agency accountable. We'll have to hold each other accountable. And what that does, it begins to change the culture, right? And all of those norms that were, when they went out, when the city, if they go out and buy new cars, a new fleet of cars is going to be all gas guzzling cars, right? V8s that spewing huge emissions. And then they look around town and say, why don't we have more electric vehicles in town? Well, the city of St. Louis, we bear the brunt of some of that because we have to create a market where the market doesn't exist, right? So if we begin to move our fleet, all of a sudden now we have power stations available all across the city. Now that makes it easier for someone and more convenient for someone, and begins to change their view of how complex it would be to have an electric automobile. Right. So after we codify it, it's going to take each and every one of us to hold everybody accountable. The development agency, they're not going to change on their own. It's going to take constant pressure. So.
Okay. Does anybody else have a follow-up question before we close? Thanks again for your work on this, and thanks again to all of you.
Can I
Yes,
do one?
yeah,
I don't know if, yes, perfect. I was going to call on you if you did. You knew where we were. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Andy Knott. I'm with the Sierra Club, and I just kind of want to maybe bring some context to how important this plan is in terms of the city moving ahead with it, and go back to this, I think it was September of 2017, when a lot of these folks here, we came to this committee back when Alderman Vaccaro was the chair, and we talked about Resolution 124. And then that resolution was adopted by the full board in October. It was adopted unanimously. Ameren, their response in the media was that they supported that because they know that their customers are wanting more choice for clean energy. And I would say that Ameren was sort of foreshadowing an announcement they were about to make in the next few weeks after that adoption in October of 2017. They announced a new long-range plan that had a much larger amount of clean energy in it than ever before. It was 700 megawatts of wind and 100 megawatts of solar. And then, a few weeks after that, Ameren proposed to the Public Service Commission the Renewable Choice Program that Henry and Andrew talked about earlier, the wind green tariff program. And when they proposed that to the Public Service Commission, they said, look, the city of St. Louis just adopted this ordinance. Our customers want clean energy, so we should have the opportunity to provide that to them. So they used that as a reason to start that program and got permission from the commission to do that. The second thing is that last year, Henry Robertson, who represents Sierra Club and some other groups before the Public Service Commission, was able to get the commission to require Ameren to consider plans like this and programs like this when they do future long-range plans. So I just kind of want to reiterate that it kind of gets to what President Reed was saying. You know, when the federal government is letting us down, when we have the Trump administration letting us down in terms of this kind of action on clean energy, it really does make a difference when local units of government step up and take the leadership role, because it does have changes, it does affect changes at the state level and at the utility level like Ameren. So I just wanted to thank you all for that, and that's all I had.
Thanks again. I mean, yeah, I think all of us at the table are interested. I'm definitely committed to helping, so keep me posted on how I can be of assistance.
For the people who are watching and the people who watch the video later, there is a website with all this information on it. You go to www.stlouis-stlouis-gov/clean-energy.
Great.
And we will also make sure that we have a link posted with the YouTube video also. Can you all just join me in one more round of applause and thank you to all of them for all of your work. We really appreciate it.
All right. Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Second. Previous role.
Hearing no objection to previous roll, we are adjourned.